Taip, ir pradėkime pristatymų nuo diskusijos moderatoriaus, žmogaus, su kuriuo jau sėkmingai pristatėme minėtą veikliąją medžiagą Revysol 2020 metais čia. Dar viena sėkmės istorija. Tai žmogus BASF komandoje daugiau nei 25 metus. Per šį laiką jis atliko daugybę tyrimų, pristatė veiksmingų fungicidų, sukaupė apdovanojimų bagažą, kuriame slepiasi Agri-Tech Award, bei BASF inovacijų ir ekspertų įvertinimai. Nuo mažų dienų jis augo ūkyje, o šiuo metu jis BASF javų fungicidų techninis Europos rinkos plėtros ekspertas. Pasitikite, Mr. Dieter Strobel. Per daugiau nei 25 metus, ketvirtis amžiaus, ji yra žemės ūkyje, žemės ūkio srityje. Ji užaugo nuo specialistės iki vadovės, dirbo tiek viešajame, tiek privačiajame sektoriuje. Augalų patologija, įgijusi daktaro laipsnį Birmingeme universitete, pripažinta techninės fungicidų atsparumo eksperte. Jos siekis šviesti visuomenę apie šios srities reikšmę ir prisidėti prie mūsų tvaresnės ateities. Gerbėmieji, pasitikite nepelno siekiančios organizacijos Pasėlių sveikatos ir apsaugos Agri-Tech Inovacijų centro rinkodaros ir komunikacijos vadovę daktarę Rosie Bryson. Dar viena diskusijos dalyvė prelegentė. Jos ilgametė patirtis javų ligų valdymo srityje. Daugybė atliktų tarptautinių tyrimų, tarp kurių ir Eurowheat mokslinis projektas, kuris nagrinėja kviečių fungicidų poveikį ligų sukėlėjams ir jų atsparumo vystymuisi. Susipažinkite su Danijos Aarhus Universiteto vyresniąja augalų patologe Lise Nistrup Jorgensen. Ir su mumis dar vienas garbus svečias, ilgametė patirtis. BASF komandoje leido jam išmėginti įvairias darbo sritis. Nuo BASF produktų kūrimo, ūkininkų ir agronomų konsultavimo iki pardavimų vadovo. Šiuo metu jis yra BASF javų fungicidų techninis ekspertas Europos rinkos plėtros srityje. Pasitikite, Mr. Steve Dennis. And dear Dieter, the stage is yours, please.
Thank you very much. So it's a real pleasure to have here such senior experts here for you. And I feel quite young, I have to say, and admire all the expertise we have on stage. So just to underline it, Rosie, how long have you been working on plant pathology so far?
Well, Dieter, as I said earlier, you shouldn't really ask ladies their age, but by my grey hair, you can probably see it's quite a long time. So I've worked in plant pathology and crop protection for over 30 years.
Wow, that's impressive. Thank you, Rosie. Lise, about you?
Yeah, I think I can beat that, unfortunately, maybe, but a little bit naughty to ask that kind of question.
I'm sorry.
But more than 35 years.
Okay, so 30 plus 35, and Steve,
and
you also have some grey hairs.
I know, grey hair also, but I also have been in the industry for 35 years, working for BASF in that time. Started in an R&D operation, moved into field technical support, and I'm now back into R&D in the cereal fungicide space.
So that makes 100 years of experience for you, and I can add my tiny 25 years on top then. But please, Rosie, why wheat is so important when we think about Europe? Why is there so much focus also on plant pathology on this crop?
I mean, wheat, as you all know, is a really important crop in Europe. And I think we sometimes forget, actually, as Europe, we're the biggest producers of wheat at a global scale. But actually, probably more importantly, is we actually have the highest yields as well in the world. So if you look at the average across Europe, we're talking about 6.5, 7 tons a hectare. Obviously, that varies depending on geography. But we are really important producers of wheat globally.
Oh, that's impressive. And among the wheat, what is European-wide the most important disease? Can you tell?
Yes, well, as I'm sure a lot of you experience, Septoria tritici is by far and away the most important disease. And just looking at the chart behind me, If you look at the level of disease that we have in a number of trials over many, many years, Septoria tritici is the leading one. If you look at the lines below, other diseases like brown rust, yellow rust, mildew, eye spot, and tan spot, they're all there, but nowhere near the same levels.
That's an impressive graph, and it looks like it even increased in occurrence over time. Sure, that is a European view, yeah, of as much as more than 11,000 trials. But obviously there are differences across Europe, not only in humans, but also in disease. And here we can ask Lise, because Lise run a project called Euroweed. So Lise, can you help us to understand what is this project about and what you have found out?
Sure. Euroweed is a project which we have been sharing, you could say, from Aarhus University in Denmark since 2015. And there we have a lot of collaborators across Europe, which gives us a very, very interesting network in trying to understand what is going on disease management-wise across Europe, but particularly when we focus on Septoria, it's very clear that there is a different pattern going on depending on where in Europe we are. So we can see that disease development is different, and particularly if we look at UK and Ireland, they are very, very challenged because they have a lot of Septoria. It often rains. I think Stephen will come into that later. But the disease conditions for Septoria is really, really good. So that means also that they have to spray more intensively in that country. And that reflects also that they have bigger challenges with resistance and control today. So
Lise, so obviously the UK guys need to spray more often than the ones which are more in the east. How did you solve this for the Euroweed program? Did you allow them to spray more often than the others?
No. In the project, we had the same protocol running in all countries. And it was testing one treatment at the flag leaf heading, which we think is the most important timing for control of cereal wheat diseases, but particularly Septoria, that we have to keep the flag leaves and the second upper leaf clean from diseases. So that's the timing we have chosen. And the same protocol is run in France, in UK, Ireland, Denmark, Poland, Germany, etc. So we can compare data in a real manner, you can say.
So a standardized protocol across Europe. And you did not only monitor disease, but also the sensitivity, and you brought a slide with you, which we see now in the background.
Exactly. That it has given us good opportunities to see the variations, because one thing is what happened in Ireland and UK, but also to see that the continent and the further east you go, less problems with mutations do you have. On the screen you see actually up here to the left, you see some mutations which we specifically know as azole mutations. And this is the fungi who developed this S524T, which is really one which impact a lot the old azoles so that they don't work as well as they used to do. Fortunately, it doesn't impact so much the new azoles which we have, but this one is really important for what we have seen in the reducing effect. In the middle and to the right, you can see that we have other maps, and they illustrate how mutations are developing to SDHI fungicides, the other major groups. So we have the azoles and we have the SDHIs, which are two major fungicide groups. And there you can see again that they have more of the mutations in Ireland and UK compared to continental Europe. And this impact, unfortunately, the efficacy in the field, which we have discovered very clearly in this Euroweed project, which we are running.
So you mentioned efficacy, and you brought this busy slide with you. So can you explain how the efficacy is impacted by these resistant mutations?
Yeah, a little bit standing up, maybe sort of to visualize. If you go to the right, you can see lots of different fungicides, which we know from Europe, and I'm sure you also know from Lithuania. So we have the Revysol, Revysol, Askra, Elatus products, and we also have solo products included in this testing. And to the right, we have 6 trials from continental Europe, and we have generally good control, which you can see in the range of 70 to 90% control from most products. We have some which are a little fading out, and that's at the bottom. We have Proline and one of the SDHIs, Bixafine, which is also not giving so good control. But quite steady there. But if you look to the left, we have the results which we have obtained from UK and Ireland. And there you can see that these products, almost all products, are much more challenged than in continental Europe. At the top there, fortunately still, we have 2 products which are still performing well, which is the Questa and the Revysol. But lower down, we have a lot of the substances which only today give around 30 to 40% control, which is not enough to really give a good control and to sustain the yield in the crop. But along here again, the same products which we saw in Europe, giving the lowest level of control, we also find again in Ireland and UK. But the picture clearly shows that we have different situations depending on where we are, and that impact the efficacy in the trial. Unfortunately, there's not data from Lithuania, but I'm pretty sure that you are in the situation here to the right. You are not in the left situation.
Right. So that is very impressive, and let's focus once more on the left-hand side. It seems that all the issues start on the British Isles. So when we think back more than 20 years ago with strobilurins, more or less overnight, so in one season to the other, they break down and fail to control anymore. We have this big group of SDHI chemistry, where a lot of innovations are in, which are now struggling, which we can see here. And then we have the azole, which are on the market quite for a long time, and also here there's some change. Steve, can you help to explain why always your country?
Yeah, good question. I think it's probably the easiest question of the day to answer, because the answer is clearly Brexit, isn't it? That's why products are not working as well in the UK as perhaps other parts of Europe. But seriously, I think there's a more mundane answer to that question as to why fungicide seems to develop resistance more quickly in our islands than they do in the rest of Europe. And one of those is down to our climate, of course. And when you think that the latitude that much of the UK is on is exactly the same as it is over here, our weather is dramatically different to yours. And we see temperatures right through the winter that are on average about 10 degrees warmer than you have here. In fact, some people would say in the UK now we don't really get a winter at all, and actually crops continue to grow, diseases continue to develop right through the winter months. They're cycling, they're reproducing, they're increasing the genetic diversity that's in that population, all of which leads to a higher risk of resistance development. But on top of that, I think the type of yields we're getting in the UK actually mean that growers are growing with a very high level of intensity. They're using high rates of fungicides. They're doing regular applications of fungicides. And all of these things lead to an increase in resistance selection for these products.
Wow. So obviously these farmers need to treat more, and then that accelerates then also the risk for resistance development. And we can see it somehow as a kind of a guinea pig what may happen to the continent. For the strobilurins, it took 2, 3, 4 years more, in Poland maybe 6, but then we faced the issues. And the same is now happening with SDHIs and with the conventional azoles. So that means a lot of weapons thinking about fungal pathogen control are gone. Rosie, there are hopefully a lot of new innovations. You have a kind of an overview what the industry is doing, not only BASF.
I mean, it's complex. I mean, I work for an organization that works with agri-technology, and the UK government funds a lot of research in this area. But I think if you look at the number of registrations at the moment for new active substances, there are not many. And I think it's a great achievement to get Revysol registered, because the European regulatory environment is really challenging. But there are other options to help with disease control. So we're looking at resistant varieties, we're looking at maybe biological solutions. But I think really it's about looking at integrated pest management, agronomy, how to grow your crop the most effective way. And I think it's true that synthetic chemistry like Revysol is still really the mainstay of disease control. Resistant varieties play a part, of course, but at the moment, I think there aren't that many tools in our armory to help with disease control.
That's true. And Lise, if we recapitulate, there are not many tools. There's a new AI, fortunately, for plant protection available, and the SDHIs are still working well on high performance. But what do they have in common? Is it, what do you think about resistance management with such powerful actives?
I think we have to be very careful in the way we use them so we don't end up like a situation in UK and Ireland. So when we apply them, that we try to minimize the number of treatments, and the best thing, if you could say, well, only once per season to minimize the selection for resistance. And then, as Rosie indicates, that we have to use the other tools as well, the IPM, the integrated pest management issues, where we use the most resistant varieties. And in Denmark now, variety mixtures are catching up as another element which can help to keep down the level of diseases and still provide good yields.
Yeah.
Because, of course, the farmers still want the best yields. Whatever variety, they wanted the diseases to be controlled, if not by resistance in the varieties, then by using the fungicides.
So resistance management is important. Yeah. How important would you judge to mix these novel AIs with a partner AI?
I think always you have to, when you apply these fungicides, you should never use them as a solo, you should use them in mixtures. So in this country, where you both have good SDHIs and you have good azoles like Revysol, the mixture is an obvious choice, because that will actually control the disease and then also minimize the risk of developing resistance. Right. So it's important to choose mixture partners which are both effective in order to sustain that they both give control and last as long as possible.
It's interesting that you mention azoles for protectant, because if I recall, this is the oldest group of chemistry, clearly older than the QOIs, which are gone a long time ago, yeah, in performance. Those they seem to have something special. Rosie, can you underline that, or what makes this azole chemistry so special?
Yeah, I think, Dieter, you might be talking about this later, but we've had the azoles in the market across Europe for many, many years, probably close on 50 years now. And I'm sure many of you remember epoxyconazole, which until fairly recently was on the market, probably 30, 40 years. Prothioconazole has probably been on the market now 15, 20 years. And obviously now we have Revysol from 2019. It's a very well understood chemistry, and I think we tend to talk about it as the backbone of fungicides. It's probably one of the longest lasting chemical groups that we have, and I think to actually have a new azole in the market and actually go through all the regulatory hurdles is a real achievement.
That's an interesting point, that you said this is long lasting. From a lifetime point of view, nevertheless, it makes a difference, new or old. And here, Steve, I may hand over to you, because you brought an image with you, which you took on your own.
Yeah, I've got to stand up for this, because I find this picture really exciting. These are pictures I took in 2019, just south of Dublin in Ireland. And the first thing to say is just to give you an idea of the sort of septaria pressure we can achieve in our islands. This disease pressure you can see on your left here is not untreated. This has been treated with full dose of prothioconazole, and we're still getting that level of septoria right up the whole length of the plant, up to the flag leaf. And then when we compare that with a full dose of Revysol on your right-hand side, this is straight Revysol, no other active ingredient included in that treatment. And I think the difference is absolutely dramatic between those. Of course, we're not saying use it straight. As Lisa said, we really must be using it with partners, but this just goes to show the level of performance we can achieve, even in our UK island, highly shifted, highly genetically diverse populations of septoria. And actually, we did a series of trials in the UK this year comparing prothioconazole and Revysol, and we were seeing yield uplifts just from switching from one azole to another over this series of trials, averaging almost 1 ton per hectare just by changing that azole on top of other products in the program.
Now, that is really impressive, Steve. Help me, when we would turn the clock back another 10, 15 years, you could state that was Proscio, which looked green, and that was the older chemistry like propiconazole or tepo, which looked brown. Is that
absolutely correct? We've seen a gradual development, and I think one of the things that's characterized the azole sensitivity in the UK has been a gradual over-year change rather than a dramatic one year to another drop-off in performance. But we have definitely seen that with epoxiconazole. We've definitely seen that with prothioconazole, to the point now where people are questioning in the UK whether it is really giving any significant performance against septoria. But it is very, very clear that Revysol has been developed in an environment where these big changes to septoria have happened, and it's been developed to control these shifted strains, and it is able to control even the more highly adapted strains that are in the market at the moment.
Yeah, and it's impressive what chemical research can do to find in a known mode of action where the fungi has adapted so much to find another tweaking option to reboost the performance, yeah, to facelift the performance in that dimension. That's amazing. And it also tells us, and that probably where the backbone idea came from, this backbone idea, that whatever may happen in future, it goes slowly. Lise, you have a brilliant chart to underpin what Steve has explained in words. That is a long-term overview on azole performance.
I like to stand up as well because I get so excited about this chart, because it's actually showing a long time series of trial work which we initiated in 2011, and it's still going on in 2023. But as you see, in 2011, prothioconazole, some of the older azoles, metconazole, tepoconazole, difenoconazole, they gave good control. We talk control in the range of 70 to 90% control. But then the population started to shift, included more mutation was building up. So by 2016, we had a very, very clear drop in efficacy. Luckily, you could say, we still have some benefit from the old azoles. They have not faded out completely. I mean, you question whether we do have benefit from some of them, and I think maybe Ireland and UK are worse than we are in Denmark, but we still get around 30 to 50% control from the old azoles, so they still benefit to some extent. But the most interesting thing is, of course, that we have above the old azoles, we have the red line, which you can see up there, and included in a circle, because it's remarkable that we have Revysol, which we started to test in 2017. And you can see that that really has a significantly higher level of control, reflecting what we saw on your picture before. We see exactly the same, that the plots are kept much nicer green, when Revysol has been treated in those plots. And of course, history, when we know that things have been not changing, we had propiconazole, epoxiconazole, and we have had changes. So we are, of course, very eager to continue to see how the efficacy of Revysol will go. But right now, it looks good, and it's also when we test the fungi in the laboratory, we keep testing it against mefentrifluconazole, Revysol, and it still performs well. So what we see here is also a clear indication that this mutation we talked about before, 524, is not impacting Revysol to the same extent as it is impacting the old azoles. So that's a very fortunate thing, and of course good that the chemists managed to make a new angle to this molecule which have made it more stable.
Thank you. Now we are also super delighted to see it, and just recap, among 80–90% of fungicide solutions contain an azole for good reason, to protect the other partner and because they have shown to have this durable performance. And there's a bit more to azoles because they can do a special job. Yeah? Although they do not stop disease right from the beginning, they have a special feature. Rosie, it's the curativity, right? This kickback.
Yeah,
can you explain how it happened, this typical spray timings for the UK? What's the role of azoles was to come up with that?
Well, as you said earlier, Dieter, we call them the backbone of chemistry, and that's for a good reason, really, because they've been a mainstay of disease control programs over many, many years. And really, as Steve talked about, we have high levels of septoria in the UK. We end up in a curative environment quite often because of the weather and the climate that we have. So it's really important that we can have curative efficacy of the chemistry to really treat our crops and maintain yield. I think, Steve, you've had a lot of experience of that as well, not just the UK, but Ireland.
Absolutely, and I think we tend to think of a fungicide application and the leaf that you're targeting, and we try and treat those as early as we can in the leaf, in the disease cycle. But of course, there's always earlier leaves that are present as well. And even if you're protectant on your target leaf, the chances are you're trying to get some curative activity on a lower leaf at the same time. And one of the amazing things about Revysol is its speed of uptake. And actually, we see as much uptake of active ingredient with Revysol in 1 hour as we get with 24 hours with prothioconazole. So 24 times the speed of uptake. And this really matters for curativity, because for curativity against septoria, we're talking about disease control inside the leaf. So that gives us improved rainfastness, but more importantly, that actually means that the product is getting to work 24 hours earlier with Revysol than it is with prothioconazole.
That's interesting, Steve. If we look on the older compounds, a lot appear in the market with some aiding substances, so morpholines, fenpropitin, spiroxamine, and there was a talk about things like a sledging effect. We have now winter sledging, it means something. Can you explain this to us, please?
Yeah. So again, in the UK, we had those techniques as well. Morpholines were heavily used for mildew control, but actually mildew is not a very frequent disease in our climate. The primary use of them many times was actually to mix with an azole, because a morpholine is not temperature dependent in the same way azoles are. Azoles are very much slowed down in terms of their uptake by cool temperatures, but the addition of a morpholine helped it move into the leaf to get the most from this curativity. The difference with Revysol, though, is it doesn't have this level of temperature sensitivity, and we see it very independent of temperature in terms of uptake speed, with rapid uptake even under cooler conditions.
That's interesting, and I can confirm in lab measurements, they cooled the plants down to 4 degrees and still found remarkable uptake. That sounds amazing, and honestly, that it is a bit like a miracle, but I think the root cause lays in Revysol's chemical properties. It's hardly soluble, and our chemists had such a hard time, first of all, to find it, but secondly, to make it effective. And to make an azole effective, you need to get it inside the plant. And here you need solubility. So they created, thanks to the chemical company, a kind of artificial solubility which can enable this high uptake you have describing.
Yeah.
So that's a super effect. And then especially if you are under cold conditions, which you may face more often, or in Poland we have, then that's a real advantage for the early application. So established timings are possible due to the power of azoles, this kickback activity. So you call it simply T1 and T2. T1 is
T1, the third leaf emergence.
Yeah. So when you have 1 or 2 nodes, and then this T2 is when
the flag leaf is emerged.
Okay. And how often do you have to spray it later on the ear?
We would spray more or less routinely on the ear in the UK. If it went very dry, maybe not. But the normal is to do a timing aimed at fusarium control. But it's really important that gives some further activity on septoria as well.
And in a low disease situation, which is a spray you must have got to get the best performance? What do you think?
In a lower disease situation, people would still go with the same main timings, and our advice certainly would be to stick with the best products available. You may manage it a little bit with dose rate, but it's a false economy to move to a less active product. Because a low disease year, all you know is it's low disease on the day you spray. A week later, it might be a high disease year, at which point you've missed the opportunity to get the best level of protection on those leaves. So it's really important to stay with the best products, even in a lower disease year.
So I clearly can sense this is the UK-Irish view where you do not negotiate on that. Lise, if we go more to the continent and you would give a recommendation for a low disease situation, what is the shot the farmer is the most important one from the 3 timings?
Well, in Denmark, it's without a doubt that's the flag leaf, which is the key. The T2 timing is the one most farmers go for. And the tradition is that they often have been splitting they have the T1, T2, and then a T3 10 days, 14 days later. But depending on the weather, they might skip the last one because, I mean, like the 2023 season, it was extremely dry, and therefore it did not pay to have this later application. But the T2, the flag leaf treatment is, I think most farmers would be very reluctant not to put that on. So, and in 90% of our years, that would be a treatment which would be paying. The farmers would have a benefit from that treatment. You can question the T1 treatment, the early treatment, under our conditions because we generally grow resistant varieties. So only when we look at our trials, 15% of the trials pay to actually have an early treatment. So from a sort of governmental point of view and a scientific point of view, we try to say, be cautious, don't make it a routine to spray with a T1. But nobody, I mean, the T2 would be something which you a must to do.
Rosie, there had been interesting studies on the yield relevance on the individual leaves. So what Lise has described, does it make sense from that perspective?
Yeah, I mean, that was something I was going to say, Dieter, because if you think what the leaves are doing, you know, they're acting like solar panels, really. You know, they're intercepting light, converting that to energy and going into the grain. But if you look at the flag leaf, so the uppermost leaf, That's by far and away the most important leaf. And I think some of the data shows it's what, 40–50% contribution from the flag leaf in terms of yield. So of course, if your flag leaf is not healthy and is not clean, that'll have a big impact on yield loss. Of course, the other leaves are important as well. You want them to be clean. Also, because they can act as a source of inoculum. So it's not just contribution to yield, it's where the inoculum's coming from and goes to the other leaves. But obviously, the flag leaf is the most important.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that perfectly makes sense. So you have to protect the flag leaf, and then what Steve said comes into account. If you wait too long, for example, until the ear pops up, that you also can protect it, then you risk that your flag leaf gets infected, and then the yield is quite suboptimal. So that was quite an interesting point. We talked a lot about high disease pressure. I'd like to bring in an example from Germany, where we used to have more often low disease pressure, and that especially as the Germans more and more drill robust or resistant varieties, especially to Septoria. So that is a nice trial from the University of Kiel. And they used the variety Knut, which is quite resistant to Septoria. And you see here on the levels, the red figures, they made it up to 2% Septoria and untreated, which is nothing. Nevertheless, the scientists were quite surprised when they brought the trial to yield, because a single treatment could boost the yield by over 0.4 tons, so 4 decitons extra yield, and if they spend 2 times the fungicide, even more. How is it possible in the absence of other diseases? That is an interesting question. And here we may look once more to Steve, because you did trials with a company called ADAS, an institution of ADAS, with a low disease focus, and you found surprising results as well.
Yeah, so ADAS are very, very influential in the UK. They do a lot of high science, where they're able to actually unpick what is going on in the plant, and then create some advice which the grower can use as well. And one of the things that ADAS have helped us investigate with Revysol is its ability to improve the use of nitrogen, the nitrogen use efficiency within the plant. And there's a number of different metrics that you can look at and analyze and see how efficiently a plant uses nitrogen. And actually, Revysol is improving all of those. So whatever is the limiting factor in your crop in terms of its use of nitrogen, Revysol can improve. And at the risk of spoiling the video that comes up later, when you'll see something about the world record that was broken in the UK for wheat growing, the grower there, one of the reasons he uses Revysol at both the early timing and the later timing is because he's absolutely believes that it improves the nutrition value of his crop. Now, this is not a reason to reduce or change your nitrogen dose, but with the prices we're paying for nitrogen at the moment, it's really important that we use every kilogram nitrogen as hard as we can and squeeze the last bit of value out of that nitrogen. And that's something that Revysol is a key tool to achieve.
So that is a super interesting story, and for sure we wanted to understand scientifically how that is possible. So with the F500 and the strobilurins, there is these physiological effects, which we also know from the greening, but with Revysol, such things were not known. And now comes an interesting point. Despite being resistant, the varieties get infected. So you typically see, well, you mostly don't see because it's invisible, it's latent infection, but these resistant varieties, they get infected. And if by chance the plants are treated with Revysol, as in this example in Kiel, then you can have a healthy inner leaf compared to the opposite. When you don't treat, there are latent infections which are then not materializing as you are used to it with a susceptible variety. So the disease does not grow as usual, doesn't show symptoms, but it kills some of the plant's power. and spoils it. And then clearly with Revysol treatment, we have more power, which can explain the better nutrient uptake and the better nitrogen efficiency. And Lise, when we discussed about that, roughly you had a different theory why this is a good idea sometimes to stop a fungal infection, even if not visible.
Well, it's well described also in scientific papers that it actually creates, or it requires energy for the varieties to protect themselves. So if there's a spore landing and starting to attack, although it is resistant, it still needs to initiate its defense mechanisms, and that is a costly mechanism for the plant. So that is part of the story. But also there is a lot of non-pathogenic fungi landing on the plants, which also can initiate this defense system. And if you have applied a fungicide, of course, then these are not initiated in the same way. So, I mean, this could, if you sort of should draw the other line, of course, I mean, should you then spray all crops if they are not diseased? And my answer would be no. I mean, you also have to be adjusting to the input depending on what you see, of course. I mean, and using what I would think also weather-driven decision support system to see what is the risk and monitor the crop, which is also very, very important still to make sure that you actually understand what is going on there and adjust your dosages accordingly to the disease pressure you have in a given situation. Maybe not skip the input completely, but adjust the dose depending on the level of disease you have.
Thank you very much. So at least we understand why we see sometimes effects even with our disease. Looking at the time, it runs so quickly. So thank you very much for this very interesting discussion. I hope you also could enjoy some questions for us, because now we are here to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, dear participants. Now Q&A session. Dėkojame mūsų diskusijos dalyviams. Aš nebejoju, kad ne vienas jūsų turbūt drąsiai ėmė ir parašė klausimą trumpuoju numeriu 1649, SMS trumpąją žinutę. Mes juos pamatysime, tuos klausimus. But let's start this session for the first question to you, Mr. Dieter. We see on the stage this big symbol. Is it letter Y? And if so, what does it mean?
Yeah, so that's a very good one. When we came up with this new chemistry, we saw a lot, how should we name it? And we came up with a brand name, as you know, because we found a reliable solution to maintain vital crops for optimum yield. So the Y stands for yield, and it's a central element of Revysol, and Revysol is a central element of our portfolio. And that's why we are also excited and here celebrate the revolution.
Okay, thank you. So let's start the Q&A session. The first question could be, with whom it's the best to mix Revysol?
So, Steve, because
with Steve, no.
Yeah.
in the UK, you have the strongest disease pressure. What would you do?
There's no question that Revysol should be used with a partner in terms of the best results, but also in terms of protecting the chemistry we have. It's really important that we don't use single AIs. Revysol is often formulated with xemium fluxoperoxide, which is a really good balance. And actually, again in the UK, with the research body I mentioned, ADAS earlier, we've actually done a lot of work looking at the mixture of fluxoperoxide with Revysol. And actually, we find a level of synergy between those two. We find that both active ingredients in the ready mix work a little bit better than you would expect from the performance from them individually. There's a range of other physiological effects we see from xemium as well, things like drought tolerance. It boosts some other disease control as well, diseases like eye spot early season. For us, yellow rust as well. So it is a really good partner, an optimum partner, I would say, for Revysol.
Okay, thank you. Have you seen that first one? Yes?
Yeah.
Mr. Dieter, is there any wheat variety in which Revysol makes less impact in terms of protection from septoriosis, right?
Well, the only thing I can imagine, I try to answer my own, that if you have a very susceptible variety, yeah, then for sure it can be too much for a single fungicide. Because if you imagine Irish situation, yeah, huge disease pressure, and then if you limit your number of sprays, that is a challenge. But other than that, if the variety becomes more robust, we have seen the difference become small, but we still see value. So.
One more question. We heard that there were big effectiveness in UK of Univoc, but in our country the situation is different. Can you explain why?
I think that's again a question for you in the UK, Steve.
Yeah. I mean, Univoc has been established in the UK now for a number of years, and it's fair to say it performs to a very high level, to a similar level to Revysol combinations. I think our climate, again, is uniquely suited for that type of chemistry. The mild conditions that we have is suited because of the way the chemistry works. And I think if you look at the pattern of performance of fenpicoxamide from the west of Europe to the east, you see quite a big difference. And actually, I would be very careful at reading UK results if I was sat in this part of the world and actually expecting to see the same performance here. Dieter, you've got some experience right across Europe. Would that fit with your experience?
You mentioned the prothioconazole or the azole impact of temperature, and we have to say with Univoc it's existing clearly, and we can explain because it's a prodrug. It needs activation, and according to the manufacturer, the activation only takes place once uptaken. And here we are. Uptake is a temperature-dependent process. If you go more to the east and leave this mild climate, as you describe, it's more challenging. And then the activation is sometimes suboptimal. That's how we explain the more diverse or variable performance of Univoc.
I think one of the other concerns, a little bit, we talked about earlier, is actually having robust chemistry to protect the modes of action. And I mean, the Innotrek in Univoc is a new mode of action, which is really good, but it needs a strong partner. And I think Lisa showed that where we have prothioconazole and some shift in efficacy now, it's a little bit questionable whether we have a good resistance management partner there. I think when we talk about partners to Revysol or anything else, it's really important they have a high level of efficacy, otherwise resistance management is challenged.
I support that. I think, I mean, Innotrek has performed well in the UK, but also on the continent in general. And I think as partners, the two products could be good. I mean, you could see Univoc, which has prothioconazole, is not the strong partner for Innotrek. Revysol would be a more strong and equal partner in the long run.
Right.
But that might be an issue between the companies to sort out.
I think we have to speed a little bit up. super discussion, and we could go for the whole morning.
Okay, going to the next one. Kodėl Europa neleidžia Lietuvai atsėliuoti žieminių javų? Ačiū. Atsėliuoti. Gerbiamas Sauliau.
Ignai.
Atsėliuoti, koks gražus žodis.
Sveiki visi. Tiesiog pagelbėsiu Ignui išverčiant šitą klausimą, nes reikėtų paaiškinti gerbiamiem atsakovam, kaip jie galėtų atsakyti į šitą klausimą. So the question is according, drilling wheat after wheat. In Lithuania, according the declaration rules, we are getting less subsidy paid if we do this wheat after wheat, yeah? And farmers are pushed not to do it. Any such information from Germany, Denmark? Because, sorry, UK guys are not part of EU anymore, but I mean, you could explain the reasons why it should be done. But again, the punishment of the farmer wish, not to do the wheat after wheat. Yeah?
I can do it directly for Germany. They follow exactly the same. Yeah? They want more diversity and push farmers to change to alternate crops. And that for sure has impact on diseases. The typical crop like disease, like 10 spot, they will disappear with that rule. Yeah? And the Germans will follow because they also need these subsidies.
I think there's a difference between continuous wheat, so wheat after wheat after wheat, and then just one wheat crop after another. Because I think in the UK it's quite common to have a second wheat, because that's often when you have the quality wheat. So the first wheat is very much a feed wheat, often, and the second wheat is bread making. It's quite an established way of going forward. Continuous wheat is a different question, I think, Steve, wouldn't you say?
I think in Denmark you can still have second-year wheat, but you cannot have continuous wheat.
Yeah.
So there are different adjustments depending on the countries, I think, how they have taken legislation on board from the EU.
Yes, Mr. Dieter, what about that third question? Have we answered already?
That we have answered, yeah. Lise mentioned that ideally it would be best to mix with Revysol, but well, it's a competitive environment.
Yes. Gal galite pasakyti, kiek kartų atliekami purškimai Airijoje nuo SEP?
The question is like this. Could you just comment how many fungicide applications are done in cereals in Ireland? I mean winter wheat, yeah?
Yeah. Typically 3 or 4. In Ireland, they wouldn't normally do a T0 so much as we do in the UK, because they are much more of a septoria basis, whereas we're a septoria and rust. For us, yellow rust comes in very early in the season, which means farmers typically do something like a tebuconazole at T0, which is growth stage 30-ish, just as the stem is extending. But then UK and Ireland, we would typically do 3 sprays after that, 1 on leaf 3, 1 on the flag leaf, and 1 on the ear.
Taip ir praktinis klausimas, vėlgi, Sauliau, geriausias paros laikas fungicido purškimui.
What is the best timing of application during the day for the fungicides? When the best uptake is done, you know? Is it middle of the day? Is it morning of the day? Or maybe it's even evening or deep night?
In England, it's when it's not raining.
but clearly in the mid-Sunday, it's not so good. Normally, you should do in the morning or in the evening where there's less wind and there's less direct evaporation.
We did actually a trial last year where we particularly looked at very early morning, midday, and evening treatments, and we found that the midday one was the worst one. So there was a significant difference in the septoria scoring, and it was best to do it early in the morning or late in the evening. But I think the preferable one was still early in the morning, as far as I remember. Yeah.
Okay,
so
thank you.
This was actually possible for the first time to show this under field condition, that it does pay to get up early in the morning and get out and do the applications.
Okay, thank you. And the last one, ar Jungtinėje Karalystėje naudojamas rudeninis purškimas nuo septoriozės?
Yeah, and the question to UK guys, do you use any fungicides against septoria in autumn?
No, is the simple answer to that. We don't find that there is an economic response at that time, and I think it would also put increased pressure on resistance development if we were to do that at that time of year.
I think also potentially you have to look at the product label, because I think in some cases you're actually not allowed to use it in the autumn. It does depend on a product, but I think often there's restrictions now, so you wouldn't actually be allowed to in many cases.
So thank you a lot, guys. Thank you. It's our honor having you here. Thank you once again for discussion. Thank you.
Well done.